Well, hello everybody. My name's John Johnson from NSF Health Sciences. I'm delighted to be presenting at the RQA Ireland Regional Forum today. And I'm going to be taking you through some key techniques, some key tips really, on how to prepare for your next regulatory inspection in this post-pandemic era. And we're going to really unpack some difficult issues that the industry have been dealing with now for the best part of 18 months. So we're going to be talking about how these events over the last 18 months, 2 years, have really affected the priorities for both preparing for and executing your GMP inspection. And ultimately, how are the regulators themselves going to react to what's happened over the last 2 years? We're going to talk about modifying your approach. We're going to talk about some hot topics from our research that are likely to come up in your next face-to-face regulatory inspection. We're going to talk about the model approach to tackling some of those difficult questions that lie ahead. You know, we know that you've had some difficult times. You've had maybe a lack of expertise and experience within the team during these unprecedented times. And you've maybe had to make some value judgments that now maybe don't hold up quite as well as they did at the time. So we're going to help you prepare for those as well. We're also going to talk about the development of effective CAPA and a remediation program. And ultimately, I'm going to use my background, my expertise in senior operational and corporate quality assurance roles to give you an insight on the best practice in this particular area. So let's dive straight in. So we've all seen the effects of what's happened over the last 2 years. We've all been affected in some way, shape or form. And you can see that some firms are really thriving. They're doing well. Their outputs are high. They're energized and business is going forward in a good way. But conversely, there's a lot of firms as well that have been hit very, very hard. We've seen supply chain disruptions across the global supply chains, whether it's consumables, excipients, raw materials, even whether it's people and expertise. And that's led, of course, to unprecedented levels of drug shortages across our industry, you know, having a real impact on the end users and patients. We're also seeing a real deficit in talent across the industry. Many firms are really struggling to fill key vacancies. People have moved on, not been replaced, and that's putting a real stress into our industry. Of course, that leads us to having to make some risk-based decisions, decisions that perhaps we wouldn't really normally like to take. Over the last couple of years, of course, we're seeing as well that those CapEx investments that were planned have just been put on hold. They've been postponed. Alternatives have been considered. Some of those alternatives have not been that effective. And equally, of course, as we all know, the first thing that is often a question during periods of hard times or tough budgets is training and staff expertise. And some of the impact on the ongoing training and continuous professional development has been really tough. And ultimately, firms on a continuous improvement, on a Kaizen program, I've often found that those upgrades have been postponed over the last couple of years. So what effect is that really having on everybody? Well, first of all, those legacy facilities that we have are now 2 years older and they haven't been upgraded. You know, do they still comply with GMP? For example, we've got a new Udrelex Volume 4 Annex 1 coming into place sometime in the next 3 to 6 months. Does your legacy steriles facility still meet what's expected to be in place in Annex 1? We've also seen as well, from looking at management reviews, from looking at site risk registers, interacting with many customers across the world, that schedule adherence across the PQS has really suffered. So we've seen that the engagement in deviation investigation reports has suffered, and that the completion of those reports within 30 days has often been really impacted. And we all know that when we do an investigation, if we're not able to engage with that investigation quickly and to engage the expertise and data to that investigation quickly, In effect, the trail goes cold and it's very difficult then to find the right root cause and therefore the right kappa. And ultimately, when that kappa is then defined, are firms still able to meet the target completion dates of that kappa, or are they being disrespected as well? So we're seeing a variety of other reports across the quality system that are now either parked or going late. Things like qualification and validation reports and updates, requalification, validation review, annual product review, change control, vendor approval, all sorts of things have been either parked or postponed with some form of justification behind it. And that some form of justification is going to be a key aspect of your future regulatory inspection. And we know that the regulators are going to be very interested in looking at these backlogs. So this has led us to ultimately having to make value judgments and compromises. You know, we're often seeing people robbing Peter to pay Paul, bringing people in from QC to work in QA, production to work into QC, and a lot of staff movement and a lot of trade-offs really in resources. And ultimately, this is leading to some subjective decisions that are causing some real pain points for us. And ultimately, of course, that always tends to cascade down to GMP deficiencies and risks to our product quality. So we have a really heady brew of issues that are occurring just now. The typical life cycle that people go through in these issues is, first of all, discovery. You know, you've got to discover the issue to start with. If your internal audit program is postponed, if your expertise is not actually on the shop floor anymore, if you're not actually finding the issues, you may have a situation where you feel like you're driving down the motorway in the dark with your headlamps off. So the first key step here is you've got to actually discover the issues for yourselves before the agency finds them for you. The trouble with discovery, particularly of discovery of nasty things, is that we often then go through a period of disbelief, denial, anger, recrimination, blame, and all of that finger pointing and you know, pretty negative time it takes up time in actually addressing the issue. You know, even when people get through that disbelief and denial and anger period, there's often a period of stasis, you know, almost like being in a yacht, a sailing yacht, and there's no wind. You're actually in dead calm. You do nothing. You're not quite sure what to do next. And that obviously can cause a significant delay before you can move into acceptance, risk assessment, proper planning, and then obviously into solving and resolving issues that then can be checked for effectiveness. Of course, the other thing we're finding when everybody's trying to work at warp speed is that they go from discovery and denial directly to execution of actions. They just want to do something really quick to just get it out of the way. But oftentimes you find that those actions that are defined in very short spaces of time are the wrong actions, and effectively you become busy fools who are just doing kappa for the sake of it, that don't actually reduce the risk of recurrence. So be very careful to go through the typical life cycle, but be aware that you want to move to acceptance as quickly and as carefully as possible, with the right data that allows you to evaluate the risk, the right inputs from everybody to plan the actions, and then to execute and check their effectiveness in due course. So what's happening from a regulatory agency point of view? Well, the first thing of all, of course, is that there is a huge backlog of inspections. And as much as there has been a real push and a real acceptance from the regulatory inspectors to do so-called remote assessments or remote audits, there is a strong desire to get back doing face-to-face inspections as soon as possible. You know, being able to do proper observation of GMP being deployed in practice on the shop floor. There is a huge desire from regulators to get back and see you at your facilities. And we're expecting that this is going to ramp up significantly from the fourth quarter 21, certainly into first quarter 22. And ultimately, sad to say, you know, the old phrase of while the mice are away, while the cats are played, the mice, wow, let me get this right. When the cat's away, the mice play. We realise that there's going to be a lot of increased regulatory enforcement as people begin to realise that some of the decisions that we've had to make have been kind of tricky and maybe not easily justified. So if you're going to modify your approach to GMP inspection preparedness, we did a poll of the things that people thought were most important. And ultimately, of course, you've got to develop in your organisation a no blame culture. That's going to be really critical in making sure that you can fix issues in full. Ultimately, you've got to look very hard at whether you need to draft in additional help. You may not be able to effect that change that you're looking for with the existing team that you've got. So focus on the culture, the communication of your team, the collaboration within your team, ultimately then to take the correct actions at the right time. Ultimately, of course, you've got to be brutally honest with the team and yourselves and really work hard to fix these issues for the longer term. So when we think about the 6 critical steps to getting back into control, the first one, of course, is you've got to own it, right? You've got to own the fact that there is an issue. You've got to be realistic with what you can do. You can't boil the ocean. You've got to use your existing resources as best as you possibly can, and ultimately make sure that any action you take is focused on the critical few. Ensuring that you're looking at product adulteration as a key risk, misbranding, and also, of course, in these tough times, on data integrity. Of course, we always recommend using a project charter and to keep going and keep going all the time until those issues are fixed. When you're trying to verify that the issues are actually fixed, this little mnemonic of in place, in use, and in control can be very, very useful. So you want to be able to verify that, first of all, there is a procedure in place. Does it fit? Is it being used? Is it understood? Can you verify that the staff are actually following it? And actually, even when they do follow it, does it work? Is it effective? And does it reduce risk in the way that you expected it to? So ensuring that things are in place, in use, and in control is very important. So we're going to run through fairly quickly now some of the hot topics that are likely to come up in your next regulatory inspection, utilising the 6 systems defined in the FDA quality system inspection technique approach, which is referenced by 7356.002. So when we think about materials control, there's going to be a lot of focus on short dating of expired materials. People perhaps using expired materials and looking for additional shelf life because of the interruptions in the supply chain. Due to resources and the talent available, there may have been some concerns around the delivery of incoming QC checks and inspection of new materials. And ultimately, you may find that a lot of your companies or your supply chain has had a huge amount of stock to store. Have they stored it correctly? Have they stored the work in progress in effective conditions of temperature or humidity? Have they got separation and segregation really nailed down? In terms of manufacturing control, hot topics are going to be about overstretching those key assets. Not just the assets of facilities, utilities and equipment, but also the assets, the people assets that are involved in this. And have production been so focused on output that they've not been able to input into important aspects of investigations into process deviations or investigations into error or data integrity? Has capacity been such a focus for this period that has led to a significant amount of human error? So the regulators are going to be very interested in the role of production over this key period. Of course, in packaging and labeling, again, trying to get the outputs where they need to be. What level of investigation, what level of recurrence has occurred in line clearance failures? What issues have occurred during non-standard labeling or printing? Have people adhered to in-process checks? Have there been issues with product changeovers? Have there been issues with mean time between failure, with packaging lines perhaps being put on shift work far more than what they were before, and those assets being burnt to such a degree that there has been an increase in the prevalence of reinspection, relabeling and packaging defects. So there's going to be a lot of focus on the quality and the reproducibility of packaging and labelling systems. Of course, in terms of your facilities, are those legacy facilities still compliant? Are they still being calibrated and maintained according to their programs? Have there been any defaults against those programs? And ultimately, if change parts or spare parts have not been available, how has the change management system been able to confirm that like for like change is always the first priority? You know, identical to identical change. And of course, whenever we're under pressure, one of the key aspects of changeovers is making sure that each time all of your product contact parts have been verified for being clean, and that you have some way of doing cleaning validation and cleaning verification appropriate to the type of equipment that you've got. So we realize that change management, cleaning validation, your calibration and PPM schedules, and your legacy facilities are going to be priorities in this particular sector. Of course, when it comes to QC, people are going to be very interested in the prevalence and engagement of terminated analyses, so-called aborted runs or terminated analyses, which signify an error, signify some deviation or variation in the process within the laboratory. And with people being drafted in at short notice, perhaps with abbreviated or abstracted training programs, what kind of prevalence are we seeing or suspected out of specification results? What type of issues are we seeing with data traceability and being able to show for sure that the data from soup to nuts is integral within the QC system? Quality management, really, we've talked about this already. This is going to be mostly around backlog, oversight of the quality unit, internal audit, and as mentioned before, change control. So in a very short space of time, you can see the types of things that the regulators are going to be looking for once they're back on site, face to face with your team. So you're going to have to deal with some difficult questions, I would say. I think we all will. And you've got to be prepared for that 2020 hindsight that sometimes occurs, that reveals some uncomfortable decisions were made, and maybe decisions that you wouldn't make now in the cold light of day with the experience that you've had of the post-pandemic effects. And post-event rationalisation is often used to try and downplay the issue, to try and take the heat out of the issue, to try and accept the issue. But don't let any of those issues hide in the shadows. You know, be very objective, be very data-driven to assess the risk probability number, you know, the severity of the issue, the occurrence or frequency of the issue, and the degree of detectability of that issue. Be clear as well, of course, that you're expected to find all, not the most convenient, but all of the potential root causes that may have led to your issue. And of course, each issue can be used as a training opportunity or as a way of learning or to gain a deeper understanding of the issue or the system, and also as a vector for driving down that risk probability number. So many firms in these difficult situations will put together a most feared question playbook. So a way of actually developing a structured storyline of what happened, why it happened, and what we did about it. So of course, the first step here is to acknowledge the issue and define it well. You know, it was Albert Einstein who said if he was just given an hour to fix an issue, he would use 50 minutes to define that issue well, because he would only then need 10 minutes to fix it. So really focusing on the definition of the issue and its effect on product impact is absolutely crucial. No excuse for referring to the CGMPs, of course. You need to summarize your procedure or give context. And ultimately, you've got to present the performance of the system. You know, how did it actually, in brutal reality, how did it actually perform during that period? Of course, you're expected to emphasize the positive, but you've got to be clear as well that ultimately, even though you're going to go through these key steps, you've got to try and avoid defending the indefendable. And ultimately, if you put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. So you've got to be really clear on what happened, how it happened, why it happened, what level of risk there was, and what you're doing about it in the future. So when we think about chain of risk, of course, the most important thing each time is the end user and the patient. And we've got to make sure that we understand where the risks are occurring, either in terms of adulteration of the product or in misbranding of the product, as the key priorities that are going to affect your patients. Then, of course, you've got to consider whether you've supplied that product not to the intended standard, i.e. you've got some form of deviation to the product license, to the compendia, to your technical agreement, or indeed whether it's a regulatory deficiency or GMP deficiency. And fundamentally, your chain of risk can then be used in your playbook to essentially identify the risk and how it was monitored and mitigated in the past with the batches that are on the market right now, how it was identified, monitored and mitigated right now to prevent any more batches being made in that way, and ultimately what you're doing in the future to prevent that reoccurrence. So thinking about the past, the present and the future, and defining those risks and defining how you're going to fix the issue. So fast forwarding to the end of the inspection, let's say you've now got some regulatory deficiencies identified and you're structuring your CAPA and you're putting together a regulatory response. I've given for you here a brief checklist of the structured approach to putting together that regulatory response. So you're expected to acknowledge the issue. You know, if it's a fair reflection of reality, you're expected to say so. If it's not, give me the justification as to why it isn't. You're also expected to give some detail on what further review you're going to do to look at where else this issue may occur. What other systemic issues may have occurred? Where did it start? Where did it end? What are the root causes? How did you find those root causes? Show the working out as to how you actually identified those root causes. And then ultimately, how do you believe it affected the product on the market, the present product, the WIP, and also for future products? And then you can start defining your immediate corrections, your CAPA, your interim actions, and the effectiveness checks that you're going to go through. So it's a very easy step-by-step approach, but don't jump straight to the CAPA. Make sure that you understand the problem in full and you understand the root causes before you define those CAPA. So in summary, we know that life is always changing. We know the priorities are going to swing. We know we're in a VUCA environment, volatile, unpredictable, complex and unpredictable. So ultimately, we know that this is going to be a tough time. We know that there's big impact issues out there for you, and you've got to be careful not to allow yourself to get swamped, you know, and to manage your resources in a way that you can look at yourself in the mirror. So further details on this, we've got some nice white papers and videos and webinars and case studies that are available on our website that you may want to access, get a little bit more detail about how we do this and how the model pharmaceutical firms get through these issues. And I'd really like to recommend you to access those. So many thanks for attending this important event. I hope it was useful. 25 minutes of your time. I'm happy to take questions, happy to take any email questions from you as well. I hope that was useful. I'm John Johnson, this was NSF, and I'm open to questions. Thank you very much.